The Colosseum did not smell of death, it smelled of bread. Freshly baked loaves handed to roaring citizens, their crumbs mixing with the dust of the arena, their laughter rising over the cries below. The Roman Empire understood something almost no civilization has dared to admit. That spectacle was currency, and agony could be harvested like grain. Beneath marble arches and imperial banners, 1,000 throats screamed not for survival but for policy. Rome's economy was fed not only by conquest, but by the noise of its people, their cheers, their hunger, their bloodlust. Every scream was taxation paid in sound. Every corpse was propaganda for the living. Rome called it justice. Historians now call it entertainment. But the truth lies somewhere in between, a ritualized economy of violence that stretched across centuries. The empire's rulers understood that to maintain control over millions, they needed more than armies, they needed catharsis. The people had to see blood to believe they were free. What began as funeral games evolved into an industrial machine of death, financed by conquest, engineered by the state, and justified by theology. By the end of this story, you will see how Rome made pain profitable, how silence was punished, and how even the emperor's mercy had an audience. You will see why the arena was not merely a sport, but the beating heart of the world's first mass media empire. It began, as most things in Rome did, with a death. When noblemen passed away, their heirs held munera, duties to honor them. These early games were sacrifices, offerings of human life to appease ancestral spirits. Captives and slaves were forced to fight, their deaths seen as repayment for the departed soul. Over generations, these private rituals grew public, and public ritual became policy. Under Julius Caesar, the games reached industrial scale. He spent fortunes on spectacles that dazzled, and horrified in equal measure staging battles with thousands of fighters, mock naval wars, entire forests recreated inside the arena. Each drop of blood served a political purpose, to remind the people who fed them, who entertained them, and who ruled them. The arena became Rome's greatest stage of loyalty. Citizens sat in tiers that mirrored the empire's hierarchy, senators nearest to the emperor, merchants below them, commoners further still. Even in death's theater, class remained unbreakable. Below them, the condemned waited in tunnels called hypogeum, damp corridors where torchlight never reached, where the screams of beasts echoed like prophecy. In that subterranean dark, the slaves whispered prayers not for salvation, but for spectacle. To die well meant a cleaner death. To falter meant mockery, mutilation, or worse, the slow erasure from memory. Rome's appetite was insatiable. What began as funeral honor now fueled imperial politics. Grain shortages, raise the games, political unrest, offer free tickets. Public executions were the empire's anesthesia. But whose suffering filled the empire's appetite, and why did it have to sound like joy? In Rome, cruelty was currency. Every execution, every fight, every scream was part of a calculated exchange between ruler and ruled. The audience provided devotion, the emperor, distraction. The louder the crowd, the safer the throne. At the center of it all stood the editor, not a writer, but the sponsor of the games. He was both producer and priest, blending economics with ritual. The editor paid for beasts, fighters, and musicians, knowing the people's applause could purchase political immortality. The empire rewarded generosity with fame and punished austerity with scorn. To deny the people their games was to invite rebellion. The spectacle's machinery consumed staggering resources. Ships sailed from North Africa carrying lions, leopards, crocodiles. Hunters risked their lives to capture them. Engineers built cages, pulleys, elevators to unleash them upon the arena floor. Each animal symbolized dominion, the wild world subdued by Rome's order. When an elephant knelt before the emperor, the crowd screamed not for pity, but for empire. In time, this blood economy reached its moral peak under emperors like Commodus. He blurred the line between ruler and performer, fighting in the arena himself, staged to always triumph. His victories were prearranged, but his arrogance was real. Rome applauded while whispering of madness. Even in delusion, the emperor understood the truth. Silence was death. To reign, one must entertain. Economists of the ancient world described this system as panem et circenses, bread and circuses. But beneath that phrase hid something darker. The games were not distraction, they were ritual consumption. Citizens devoured death as a form of communion, proof that the empire was eternal. As long as the sand drank blood, Rome's gods remained appeased. The midpoint of the story arrives here, an empire addicted to its own theater, a people numbed by spectacle. And the question whispers through the marble corridors: what happens when the screams stop? By the 2nd century, the machine had become self-aware. Rome's justice system fed directly into the arena. Criminals, rebels, and Christians condemned not merely to die but to perform their death for an audience. The boundaries between punishment and performance dissolved. The empire no longer asked whether the condemned were guilty, it asked whether they were interesting. Chroniclers describe the choreography of horror with bureaucratic precision. Executioners rehearsed timing. Musicians practiced crescendos. Sand was raked for aesthetic effect. The spectacle was polished until it gleamed. The people demanded novelty. Rome obliged. They staged historical reenactments where prisoners played the roles of mythic villains, condemned to die exactly as their characters had in legend. It was not enough for justice to be done, it had to be seen, felt, and heard economically. The system sustained itself. Cities across the empire competed to outdo Rome. Local governors built amphitheaters as symbols of prosperity, draining treasuries for seats and stones. Merchants sold miniatures of gladiators, charms, and trinkets shaped like the arena. Even the sand was a commodity imported, cleaned, reused. Violence had become a supply chain, but something began to shift. As Christianity spread, whispers grew. What if these games were not divine order, but blasphemy? Some Christians refused to attend, calling the games demonic liturgy. Martyrs died without screaming, defying the empire's demand for sound. The silence disturbed Rome more than any rebellion could. When the crowd could not feed on fear, the empire trembled. What use was an emperor if his people no longer needed him to sanctify their cruelty? The decline of Rome was not only military, it was emotional. The blood economy began to collapse under its own weight. The state could no longer afford the endless games. Wild animals grew scarce. Wars yielded fewer captives. The empire's theaters of death fell silent one by one. When the Colosseum closed its gates in the 5th century, grass began to grow over the sands that had once absorbed oceans of blood. The silence that followed was deafening. Rome, which had lived by the scream, now suffocated without it. The people had been trained to find purpose through spectacle. Without it, faith replaced theater. In the ruins of amphitheaters, monks built churches. The same arches that once framed executions now echoed with hymns. But even Christianity, in time, inherited Rome's obsession with suffering, transforming it from performance into theology. The crucifix replaced the arena, but the fascination remained. Historians call it transformation. Others call it survival. Rome's genius had always been adaptation, turning cruelty into culture, spectacle into institution. The blood dried, but the psychology endured. Power still required performance, and pain still drew the crowd. The lesson lingers like dust in marble cracks. Civilization advances, yet it never stops watching. Rome's blood economy ended not with revolution, but with exhaustion. An empire built on spectacle had taught the world one truth, that fear unites longer than love. Every scream was an investment, every silence a rebellion. To this day, we inherit the echo of our screens, our crowds, our obsessions with watching tragedy unfold. The arena's changed. The hunger did not die in the end. Rome did not die, it evolved into every society that still trades emotion for control. And somewhere, beneath all the marble, the sand still remembers. Next episode, the plague courts of Venice when quarantine became religion.